We're hearing about it all across the country. New restrictions placed by different states, different localities, regarding what churches can do, people of faith can do, what individuals can do. Well, we're going to talk about specifics in the second part of this program, and some of these things are outrageous, folks. I'm not hiding this one bit. Some of them are just outrageous. So we're going to talk about some of these specifics and what we at Pacific Justice Institute are preparing to do to combat some of these more outrageous restrictions and limitations when it comes to ministering and religious freedom. But the first part of the show, I want to talk about some real practicalities. First, where do we go from here? I get calls at the Pacific Justice Institute all the time from pastors, ministers, and people saying, okay, where are we? Where do we go from here? This can't go on forever, can it? Can the government permanently keep churches from meeting? Yes, on one side, we realize there's a reason for this. This isn't just an ad hoc kind of a thing. It's not like a government just doesn't like Christians and therefore they're persecuting. There's something behind it. But still, we can't help but think, okay, does that mean they can just do this forever? What exactly is involved in this? Well, I want to talk about understanding where it is legally, because religious freedom is not an absolute right. But government's ability to infringe on it is not absolute either. The general rule is that religious freedom is protected and the government cannot infringe on it, cannot create a substantial burden on churches and religious freedom and their practices unless they can show that there's a compelling state interest here to justify this infringement, that there's a real compelling need to get involved. Well, in this situation, we have the coronavirus. That's something that could potentially cost lives and has cost lots of lives already. So that's right there a justification of a compelling state interest. Well, they also have to show that their restriction is narrowly tailored to the most least restrictive means of furthering that interest. Okay, so they can't just say, okay, churches can never meet ever, don't ever mention the word of God anywhere. That's way too broad. There needs to be very narrow and very specific. That's part of the problems that we're seeing with some of these state regulations and guidelines that we're seeing coming out. I mean, it's outrageous how they are in terms of not being really narrowly tailored. You know, for example, they'll say that it's okay to go out and to the grocery store and you can park your car and you can be in the parking lot, no problem. But then when it comes to a church having a parking lot service, oh, you can't have that. We're going to talk about some of that in the second part, so I'm not going to get too much detail on that. Or another example is dealing with unequal treatment, where they're treating people different. They're treating churches different than others. For example, there are governments saying that a church cannot have people drive up to get communion. But there's no problem being able to drive up to a Bevo's or a Total Wine store, a liquor store, and getting a whole bottle of wine. Is that a narrowly tailored restriction to say that you can't drive up to get communion, but they're allowing it to happen in other places to drive up and get full bottles of wine? That makes absolutely no sense, and it's not an equal treatment under the law. We see some serious issues there as well. So as things come about, we're going to have to look at the facts. That is, how extreme are the facts? They're changing all the time. Are we over the hump? Are things now coming down and now being more safe and therefore less risky? If that's the case, then maybe some of these restrictions are no longer really justifiable, at least to the degree and the extent to which they have them. We're going to see things, I believe, loosen up. And it's not going to be all at once, okay, everyone go back to your mega church, no requirements, etc. No, we're going to see things loosen up gradually. We have to make sure that as things are loosened up for churches and people going to church and things like that, that at the very least it's keeping pace with loosening restrictions on other things like people going to movie theaters and large restaurants. Also, we need to understand that time is a factor. Time is a big factor, folks. So what the government might be compelled us to do for a week or two may not be the same that they can justify for months. Because when something is drawn out for months, then it becomes a norm. And a norm is not acceptable when it comes to violating fundamental rights. So every day that goes by, the government becomes weaker and weaker in their ability to support a compelling state interest because time weakens the urgency, it weakens the justification for them to be able to limit and infringe upon our rights under the First Amendment. So time is a factor. As time goes on, it becomes more and more difficult for the government to continue their extreme restrictions regarding churches. And when I say extreme, I'm not saying necessarily they're always bad. Reality is we've seen a lot of lives lost, and we've seen churches that have been very sloppy. And that's cost a lot of lives at the same time. So what I am saying is that there are nonetheless very severe restrictions that are keeping people from carrying out their faith and worshiping and forsaking and having to forsake the congregating together, which we are directly exhorted to not do in Scripture. We also see that there are some things that churches can do moving forward. That's what I want to talk about right now. First, we've had pastors contact us and say, well, I think we're going to have my church, ask them whether we should continue meeting. Now, this is assuming that it's legal, all right? Assuming it's legal, should you ask your church for their opinion? Have them vote on it? Absolutely not. First off, it's your job as pastor or as elders to make those decisions, to look and assess the situation, whether or not you should have your church service, given the law and given all the factors involved. But in addition, oftentimes people in a church, they don't want to come across as spiritually weak and wimpy. No, they believe that they're going to be taken care of and they want to seem spiritual and holy, so therefore they're going to feel intimidated to all raise their hand and say, yeah, we should continue meeting. So don't leave it up to them. Number two, if you're going to meet, engage in all of the practices reasonable to protecting your congregations. Number one is for example, have them wear masks. If you can get an N95, get an N95. They are extremely helpful. That's why so many have insisted that they go to the doctors and the nurses. It's not to protect the patient, it's to protect them, because an N95 mask does exactly that. It prevents people from getting the virus. So if you get an N95, great. Be careful online. There's a lot of fraudulent actions taking place, people selling masks that really are not up to that level. So be very careful. You can also wear a bandana, something that'll guard and protect your face. Do what you need to, and encourage your congregation to do that as well if you meet, if you come together and have a meeting. Also, distancing. If you have a meeting, a worship service, something like that, have people distanced. Now, obviously, husbands and wives, yeah, they can sit together. They're exposed to each other all the time, okay? And in children, families. But have required so many seats to the left, to the right, to the front, and the back from those people. You're saying, well, wait a minute, that'll be a fraction of my church. Okay. Have several more church services. Spread them out. You want to spread them out during the week, do that. But do what's necessary to make sure you're being prudent and protective. You may have to do a lot more preaching. That's not the worst of it. The worst of it is being sloppy and having some of your members pay the price. You also want to encourage people to stay at home if they're at risk. Have them assess that, but say there's nothing holy and spiritual. If you are in a risk category, and spell out the risk category about in terms of age, in terms of bronchial issues, in terms of diabetes, in terms of cardiovascular issues, asthma, spell that out and say there's nothing spiritual about risking your life. Stay at home. That's very, very important. Also, you want to sterilize the facilities, okay? Clean it down and clean everything, the knobs, everything. Make sure everything is all cleaned down continually and regularly, and be up to date with what's necessary for proper sterilizing. And that's a whole other topic, but that's not hard to do. You also want to make sure that people at home are not forgotten. Continue your video services that you have on video via Facebook or YouTube. You can do this fairly easily. We at Pacific Justice Institute actually have a training video which spells out how to easily have church services online through Facebook or YouTube. And we do it by using Zoom, which is another vehicle you can utilize as well. So this is definitely viable. It's out there. This is for people at home who can't go to church. But you know what? There's also a new ministry opportunity, folks. We're looking at churches that have told me that said, I have 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as many people watching my sermon online than attend our church usually on Sunday mornings. This should be a game changer, a positive game changer. So that when we come back and we worship regularly, go ahead and have these online services for people in the church who have to stay at home for whatever reason. Maybe they're sick down the road, or people who are not attending your church but still want to be ministered to. It's a great opportunity. You also, of course, want to contact Pacific Justice Institute to know the law. We at Pacific Justice online have memos for 30 different states, legal memorandums for 30 different states spelling out what the law is, what's required in easy to understand language. Go to our website and get that resource information at pji.org or pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org. Moving ahead, there's also great opportunities like church homeschool co-ops. Church homeschool co-ops. Folks, this is fantastic. Everyone's homeschooling. At the same time, we're learning how government schools are coming out with hideous, absolutely hideous matters involving sex education that is just total in violation of what of a moral Judeo-Christian worldview would allow. Well, now's the time to homeschool. Go to our website and see how your church can be a part of a solution. And also you can visit people in your community and also visit people in your church and serve them by doing grocery shopping for them, ministering to them, loving them. Times of tragedy are often times to demonstrate the love of Christ. Let us never forget that. Let's make the most of it now and from now on.
Given the choice of obeying God or the government, I believe Christians will obey God, even if there is hell to pay.
Since the earliest days of our nation, America has stood for religious freedom. And after our independence was won, the crafters of America's Constitution enshrined religious liberty as the first of our American freedoms.
These are our blood-bought freedoms that we get to own and operate and defend in this nation as Americans. We're not going to surrender this. We are going to fight for what's right.
So I think it's imperative for our testimony to
Right.
show we really do love, we really do care, we see what's going to happen.
Bloody violence breaking out after Antifa protesters storm a Patriot prayer rally.
Do you think religious institutions like colleges, churches, charities, should they lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage?
Yes.
Parents across the state are keeping their kids home from school today. They say the new sex ed program is too inappropriate, adding the curriculum sexualizes children as young as kindergarten age.
I realize my child and every child is not safe in these public schools.
A lot of graphic information that was confusing.
Tells little boys it's perfectly normal to masturbate.
Choose their gender.
That's our children. And we have parent groups fighting this.
We were raided.
Approximately 16 California Highway Patrol officers armed with 2 canine units.
The real bottom line motivation for this, we've discovered, is the fact that the Department of Social Services and those who are behind this raid were actually wanting to shut this school down because they knew it was teaching from a Christian biblical worldview.
I was stripped of chaplaincy, of being a volunteer, of being able to teach the Bible study.
So what had Artis done that was so egregious? She had had a conversation with another resident of the home about the afterlife.
I was at school one day and they were talking about sex education and how it was okay to have sex with the same marriage. And I then stood up and I said, no, that is not okay. And then I got kicked out of class.
And we were able to draft a legal letter, memo, and sent it off to the principal.
So now if I talk about God at school, I don't get in trouble.
The Supreme Court has ruled the Peace Cross can stay right where it is on public land.
The court said that, if they were to remove street signs and crosses like this, war memorials, just because of the fact that some see it in a religious context, that would actually violate the Establishment Clause by being state hostility to religion.
As soon as we started the church, the neighbors looked at you a little funny, and all of a sudden we find ourselves embroiled in a lawsuit.
An atheist threatened to sue our HOA because we use the Sunday morning facility.
In the settlement, we got it squared away that we could meet on Sunday mornings, that we would not be discriminated against.
The administration escorted me off campus with 2 police officers.
And the arbitrator overruled the school and said, nope, this is not worthy of termination.
And I was granted my job back. So I'm very grateful to PJI. They really stand for justice.
Drag Queen Story Hour drew hundreds of people to the South Hill Library. The man who was arrested is a local pastor who wanted to preach at Saturday's protest.
So you're going to arrest me for standing on a public parking lot?
Now, he didn't threaten anyone, had no weapons, wasn't screaming in people's faces.
We just wanted to be a voice, for God, and just to be a light and a salt for those children.
The Pacific Justice Institute is absolutely doing great work.
This organization is a fighting organization. You help it, you're the same as the fighter.
I am so grateful. The Pacific Justice Institute, please support them. They are worth every penny.
It didn't cost us anything.
We would have drowned in legal fees. We would have been no more instantly.
I'm super grateful for PJI. They were a godsend.
Pacific Justice Institute as an organization is wholly committed, fully committed to doing the right thing, to being something good.
And folks, if you'd like to support the work of the Pacific Justice Institute, it's really easy to do that. Just go to our website, pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org, and there you can sign up to support us on a one-time or on a monthly basis. Right now, we have over at least 47 cases in active litigation, and that number is growing. And we're doing this work completely without charge, and we're able to do it because of people out there like you who hear about what we're doing and want to become a part of a team. Not just observe and listen to what's going on, but actually become a part of the team. And that's so important. We at Pacific Justice never forget where our bullets come from by God's grace. We're in the trenches. We know where those bullets come from by God's grace. It's people out there who are part of our team, who believe in what we're doing. So thank you so much as we move forward together to defend our basic fundamental civil liberties that are under attack uniquely as we speak. We also have a great resource called our Legal Insider. Folks, it's easy to sign up to get this. Once again, just go to our website, pacificjustice.org. It's free, it's without charge. It'll keep you updated on things you need to be lifting up in prayer as we move forward to defend religious freedom, parental rights, and the sanctity of human life. Now, we have with us online an attorney who heads up our work in the state of Washington, Jorge Ramos. Jorge, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Brad.
Now, Jorge, there's a lot of things going on right now, a lot of problems, and I mentioned in the first segment with regards to local governments, state governments, becoming really outrageous, unreasonable when it comes to the rights of churches to be able to carry out their practice and minister, and in some ways that I think are just very, very extreme. Like, for example, we're talking about churches being threatened and written up simply because they have a church service in their parking lot. Everyone's in their cars, the windows are rolled up, and they're listening to the service that's taking place inside, or they have the pastor on the outside, perhaps with a some kind of device where he's speaking and they can listen to it from the inside of their car. We see governments telling them that they can't do this when we have people in their cars all the time parked in parking lots across the country, whether it's Walmart, whether it's in a hotel parking lot. We've seen that. And yet for some reason, it's not safe for people to sit there parked in a church parking lot. What have you heard about this, and what are some examples that sort of bring this to light?
I was contacted by a church here who wanted to comply with the order 100%. So they proposed, well, can we have a drive-in service where everyone will stay in their car, no one will get out. They'll comply with the order. And I actually took initiative to reach out to the Governor Inslee's contact here who's handling this situation. And I calmly wrote him, please give us the authority, the scientific evidence that you have that the coronavirus can jump from car to car. And this initiated a discussion between us via email where he said he was getting ready to send me some guidelines. So we were eagerly waiting that to see if perhaps they would comply or give us the opportunity to host the Easter service of all services. And they refused. They simply just said, well, the governor has authority to do this under the Washington RCWs, so he's going to disallow the service. And our contact here, this church here and locally, he went back and forth, but he decided not to have his Easter service. Now, this happened on Saturday where the Kentucky ruling came out. Some wonderful lines in that I can just recite to you here. The Kentucky,
yeah, please do.
Yeah, the Kentucky, let's see, it was the Western District of Kentucky, I believe a Trump appointee, basically said that the mayor's decision to, and he emphasizes that remaining in their cars, and even in Easter, the Mayor Greg Fisher of Louisville decided to criminalize the communal celebration of Easter. And this is the court saying, the mayor's decision is stunning and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. So this was a federal judge in Kentucky who goes on to give one of the best rulings I've heard, and I think we should probably post this on our website just for everyone to read. It's quite fascinating, but essentially just goes through, and I think it's important to say that this judge actually says, well, we have liquor stores who are still open with their parking lots, and we can apply that to Washington. We have weed dispensaries all across our state with parking lots.
Marijuana dispensaries, they can be open. Liquor stores can be open, and they can have their parking lots and people sitting in their parking lots, but you can't have people in a church parking lot sitting in their cars to be able to hear the word of God and to be ministered to. So the judge got that, and he wrote it very clearly. I'm very impressed with him as a judge. I'd love to see him actually move up in the ranks to be on the circuit court, and I understand he's actually possibly under consideration for that moving forward. But the fact that he came down with such a strong ruling like this, Jorge, what impact do you think that's going to have potentially on other places? I mean, it's not binding on other states, but federal courts are required to give consideration for similar decisions dealing with similar issues of law and fact. What impact do you think this would have on other jurisdictions, like, for example, the Washington state?
Yeah, that's something we're taking in consideration here with our chief counsel, Kevin Schneider. We also just saw a case come down out of San Diego, very similar facts, but essentially that court over here on the west side decided not to grant a TRO. We don't have the ruling in front of us. We don't know the exact same facts, but it shows that courts are taking this, of course, case by case, and it's so we're trying to guide our client to fully show that they're reasonable, trying to comply with all the social distancing, and by every means telling their congregants, if they do come, they're not to come out of their car. They won't be allowed to. Bathrooms will be closed. Don't, stay in your car, essentially, 100%, because we respect the epidemic that's going on. But also, I think we got to go to Arizona, which said worshiping is a fundamental right under the Constitution. And we're looking here for a middle ground, which I think I think it's even less than a middle ground, honestly. Staying in your car is pretty much the lowest experience you could probably have. and
right.
that's all that we're asking for, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, also, what about those circumstances where you have, say, churches that want to give something to someone? I know during Easter time, there were some churches, San Bernardino, they wanted to give Easter baskets to the kids so the parents would drive up to the church and the pastor would give it to the parents. And the city or county of San Bernardino, I believe it was, or Riverside in Southern California, they said, no, you can't do that, can't do that. Well, I heard that San Bernardino has reversed its draconian restrictions against some of these issues, like, for example, like parking lots and being in the church parking lot. So that's a positive. But it seems to me like a church should be able to confidently be able to give out things, particularly like sacraments, like communion. If people can go to a wine store, a liquor store, a Bevo's or a Total Wine store, drive up and get their bottle of wine, they should be able to drive up to a church and receive communion. I think that's another area that to me is pretty much a no-brainer if we want equal protection of the law, and churches have a fundamental right. Liquor stores don't have a fundamental right under the Constitution to distribute their booze whatever they want, or their alcohol whatever they want. But churches do have a fundamental right when it comes to the practice, the religious practices that they carry out. So what is your take on that? Have we seen any movement in that regard by any of the states, one way or the other?
Yeah, I think while you're speaking, I just thought of the Kentucky judge's ruling, and he spends quite a bit of time explaining, because remember, he does have to explain how important our faith is to unbelievers, because, you know, everyone who doesn't follow Jesus might not understand why this is also important to us. So we have here a federal judge laying out the importance of Easter and our faith. So yes, it is important for us to get our sacraments and to be able to give our members, and even unbelievers as well, just, you know, food or Easter baskets or Bibles, whatever we want to give out. I think it's just very important for people to know that this isn't just a club that we're part of. This is our life, and living it is fundamental to who we are. So I'm hoping that other courts will realize this. And I do want to say, I even think even Washington State, Governor Inslee hasn't issued. If you read the Kentucky order, there was some very strong language saying this is by no means going to happen. If it happens, I think he said that the congregants will be mandatorily 14-day quarantine, will take down their license plates, and you know, this hasn't happened in Washington. I don't know if it's happened in other states, but that was very, very extreme. And I'm hoping with more things that happen this week with the DOJ and maybe other rulings coming out, that some governors will soften their stances on churches and allow at least drive-in services.
Right. I want to talk about, just before we close up here, Jorge, the importance for people to understand that we at the Pacific Justice Institute are here to serve you. So if you have something taking place in your church, contact us. You know, even more severe than that is the fact that some states have it so that it's not just 14-day quarantine, it's up to a $1,000 fine. It's up to months in prison. So contact us at the Pacific Justice Institute if your church has any issues at all. You see this happening. We are ready to step up. The Attorney General Barr has also stepped up and said, look, this is outrageous. These violations of religious freedom is outrageous. They're not reasonable. So you have things happening, contact us at Pacific Justice. Yes, be wise and discerning. We don't want this disease to spread, and churches need to be discerning with regard to their own situations. But we also need to be wise in terms of knowing our rights and utilizing our rights to glorify God and His kingdom. Yes, in times like this as well. Jorge, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, President of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.